Hi, welcome to Lunch and Learn. I'm one of your hosts, Patsy Shreve, and
I'm Cynthia Martin, and welcome today to Lunch and Learn.
our topic for today is storms of life. There's a variety of different storms that we can encounter in life, whether it's physically or emotionally or spiritually. There's a lot of different classifications of storms. We live in the Gulf Coast. So I live in Alabama, and Cynthia lives in Pensacola, and on the Gulf Coast there's always storms. Every summer we know it's hurricane season. And so those are things that we have to prepare for. We have to get ready. We start ahead of time before the storm season, even with preparations of food and water, and make sure we just had our generator fixed because we knew, well, we might need that this hurricane season. And as most of you know, we just went through one tropical depression or tropical storm, Cristobal. And although it was fairly minor, there's still problems that can arise from that with flooding and different other problems. So we've been through a lot of hurricanes, and so we understand a lot about the physical end of it with weather, and we can relate that to the spiritual side. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing today is helping you understand there is a physical side, but then we can also relate that to the spiritual side.
For sure. And Patsy and I are not meteorologists. If you know anything about me, I don't do anything outside. I avoid it at all costs. But we watch the news, we watch the Weather Channel, we have our certain things. And just a few weeks ago, I kind of giggled. There was this in just a local channel, I think it's Automobile, and they were having some sort of a storm that only occurs every so often. And I thought the poor little meteorologist was going to faint. He was so excited about this storm, or the possibility of a storm that only occurs like every 10 years or whatever. And I mean, he was selling all these graphs and going way over our heads. And I thought, this poor man, he's going to hyperventilate. Because he had opportunity to witness and be a part of and predict and talk about a storm that didn't always happen. And so he was terribly excited. And I thought, that poor little guy, he's gonna hyperventilate and he's gonna pass out. But we kind of joke here in the South and in the Gulf Coast, and we make these jokes like, we're okay, we're gonna be fine. We keep in our pantry, we have a certain amount of cases of water. We have certain things that we have. And even I'm going to the grocery store later today, and I'll be getting another extra case of water because we're beginning of hurricane season. It just happens every June. And we keep so many levels or so many cases of water. And when we deplete one, we put it back. So we have all of that. So we prepare, but we make these jokes on Facebook. Patsy, I know you've seen them. And we know we're all safe until Jim Cantore shows up. Isn't that true? And we make a joke out of it, but it's so true. We all freak out. We're watching on the Weather Channel. We're listening to everything they say. Yeah, we know. We're waiting to see what level it is, what our response is going to be. But we're watching, and wherever Jim Cantore shows up, and I don't know, my guess is because he's experienced and he's kind of up there time-wise, but he tends to go to the center or where it's going to be worse. So if he shows up in your town, you better start taking this seriously. Don't you know? I mean, it's kind of a joke, but it's really true.
True.
And so, and again, we're not talking about physical storms, but there's so many correlations between a physical storm and the kind of emotional and spiritual storms that we go through that Patsy and I thought this would be a great topic to discuss out there for those of you who may be in the midst of a storm. And a storm, it can be different for everyone else. We had a storm just a few years ago, a couple years ago, I guess now, Michael. It hit in the Panama City area and a little bit even more east into Mexico City Beach. But at the time when it occurred, Dean and I were living, actually our home base was in Panama City in Callaway, which is on the east side of Panama City. And we were living in our sister-in-law's house, my sister-in-law, Dean's sister. And that house was totally demolished. One of our vehicles was there. It was completely totaled. Our boat is still in the yard. It completely smashed the trailer for our boat. We need to get that taken care of one of these days. We just haven't done it. People also, that's kind of like a side note that I didn't even think about, but people who don't live here don't realize that it is years recovering from a storm like Michael, or specifically for both Patsy and I, we were affected by Ivan. I don't know how many years ago that was, Patsy. You probably know better than I do. Probably at least 10, maybe 12. I don't know. But it's been a while. And I think Pensacola has just kind of gotten back to its normal after that long of a period. It does take many, many years for people to recover from a storm. And, same way in the spirit realm, when we get hit by a storm, the magnitude of a hurricane, maybe the magnitude of a 5 like Michael, or a 4 or a 5 like Ivan, it may take you years to overcome some of the dilemmas and the traumas that occurred to you during that lifetime. And you need to give yourself a break to have the time to heal. Now you can get help. We can have some companies and buildings and houses are already back to normal because they got the help that they needed to restore themselves. But I want to talk about my reaction to a storm, a physical storm. It really correlates to what happens to me in a spiritual storm. My idea is, if there's a storm and it's going to be a 1 or 2, we just stay home. We're going to get lots of rain and a little wind. We pick up things in the yard. We have some food at home in case we're going to lose power. We probably aren't. It's not a big deal. A lot of rain, we'll just stay home. Gets up into a 3. Now we start making some decisions at my house. Dean, if it was up to him, he would stay no matter what. But at a 3, I start making a decision. And usually I'm out of here. I say, this is a good time for me to go visit the kids. And my choice is never to stay. I don't want to know. It's like when surgery occurs. I don't want to know about it. I want you to put me out. I want to wake up and it all be over. And that's tends to be my reaction if I'm not, we'll talk about if I'm not got myself secure in where I am with the Lord. It's something hits me that I'm not quite ready for, or I'm not expecting. My first response is flight. I'm going to go. I'm going to leave. I'm not going to deal with the situation. I'm going to go. And everyone has a different response to storms. We have a different response to a physical storm. We have different response spiritually. But in a physical storm, if it gets to a level 3 hurricane, for those of you that don't know, they have different ratings. The higher it gets up, the more destruction. So at a 3, for me, that's the time that I'm making the choice to go to Michigan and see my children. I'm ready to leave. And I told my husband, Dean, that I married him because he brought peace into my life. He's very peaceful. And I desire peace above most things. I want peace. I don't fight with people. I'm not a fighter. I'll leave. And that's one of the things that is different for me. And I have to be careful with that. I just don't go into my flight response.
Yeah, and I know my response is totally different because Cynthia and I are different in a lot of ways, in the way we perceive things and the way we look at things and the way we react to things. Yeah. And we complement each other. That's why we work so well together, because her weaknesses are my strengths, and my strengths and my weaknesses are her strengths. And so that's why we can work well together, because we can rely on each other to help reinforce those areas that we're weak. Well, my reaction, especially like during Ivan, was to hunker down and stay put. I wanted to know what was going on. Now, whether that was just pure ignorance, because I've never been through a hurricane before, so I didn't know what to expect. And I know Cynthia and another friend of ours were saying, what are you doing? Why aren't you leaving? Why aren't you leaving? Well, we didn't know any different.
We'll be fine. We'll be fine. It's going to be an adventure. Like, yeah, we'll go into the mall in Huntsville as an adventure too, because that's where I went.
and so we were just, and we had known we were in a brick house. And so we didn't think, though, about all the consequences of what could happen during that storm. But my first reaction is to just prepare and get everything we needed, the water and the food and whatever we needed. We filled up our bathtubs, because you do that so you can flush your toilets, because you don't think about not having water to flush your toilets and no electricity during a storm. And so, we didn't even expect. So we thought, okay, we'll just hunker down. And we usually do. Now, if it's a huge storm, we would probably leave now, knowing what we know. but we do react different ways. And even in the spiritual sense or the emotional sense, I tend to hang in there and stick in there, even sometimes to my detriment, but but I just stick to it and stay put and want to just kind of hunker down and just hang on and just see it through and write it out. Basically, I'm more of a write it out kind of person,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's fine to do that in a spiritual sense, but sometimes there is wisdom in going
Letting go and moving on.
right.
And as I said, my first instinct is just get out of it. And there are times that it's important that I stick it out.
Mm-hmm.
And there's times that I could stand up for myself and for the situation that I'm in a little longer, and it may work out better. But that's who my makeup is. My makeup is to do that, and your makeup is to do the other. And I'm not saying, and I don't think you're saying either, Patsy, that either one is right or wrong. It just is. It's who we are, and God created that for a purpose. And so when we look at spiritual things, a lot of times I will call you, and you know this because I'm talking to you, but people here that are listening, as I call my friend Patsy, because I know I'm only seeing my side, and I'm not talking about fights among other people, but in situations when I take a viewpoint, a pretty strong viewpoint, I always have in the back of my head that there's another view that I can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll call Patsy and I'll say, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm thinking. And I'm believing that God's doing this prophetically. And then she'll say, yeah, but what about this? And I'll think, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. And, I think it's important that we have both views. Her view isn't wrong. My view isn't wrong. It's just my view.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to talk a little bit. Want to stay in that vein about talking about storms, because so many storms come at us emotionally, spiritually, things that we have no control over, things that we see coming that maybe we could have avoided had we done some work beforehand. Maybe we could have avoided some storms because we'd have done personal work in our own lives. Maybe we could have avoided some of the storms because we did some preventive work in our relationships. Maybe we needed to confront a specific situation, or maybe the storm is because we did confront and we should have left it alone. And so there's really truly some correlations between how we handle a physical storm and how we handle emotional storms. And the first point that I want to make today is God's hand is in the storm.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a relationship with him, his hand is in the storm, and that his plan is to center our soul and not sink our ship. Mm-hmm. When I was going through a divorce, there was a popular song. I've never been able to find it, but it goes along the lines that sometimes God calms the storm, and sometimes God calms the child. And I was in a nasty situation for over 5 years. And I was praying that God would stop the situation, and he was working in me to calm me in this situation. And sometimes we want it to be one or the other. Usually we want him to calm the storm, and he a lot of times is wanting to work something in us during that time. So we need to settle for ourselves that God does not place us in situations that is going to be detrimental to us, or that we're going to be left there alone. When we consider ourselves alone, we need to recognize that he is in that storm with us. And what is a storm for us is not a problem or a storm for him. That's kind of frustrating too, because we're up here freaking out, and God is like, this is not a big deal. I created the universe. Whether your winds blow or whatever occurs with you, this is not a big deal for me. I'll say to people, God is not chewing his fingernails wondering, oh my, sitting on the edge of his throne wondering what's going to occur next. We need to get that picture of God. It's kind of silly, but it's really true. He is not up there. And when I said that God's hand is in the storm, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that we should blame God for the storms that we face. Sometimes the storms that we face, we've created them. Sometimes they are storms that other people have created, but they're not necessarily, am I saying, they're his fault. He didn't necessarily design them, but he may allow you and me to go through them to develop our faith and to mature us. Now, I can look back over my life over many years now, and I can say, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God's going to be with me because I have a history with him. But when I first started my journey, I couldn't trust God because I'd never been able to trust a soul. So God had to begin to take me through things and show me that he was in the midst of the storm with me so that I could learn. Maybe the first one was this big, and then the next one was this big, and then the next one was this big, and now they're huge because I have this history of believing God and trusting him in the storms. So even when we're on an assignment for God, you think, well, I'm doing this for you, God. How could you allow this to happen? I'm trying to do everything right. And this came out of left field and it hit me. That so much is so true. We think because we're in the middle of what God has for us that we're not going to encounter any kind of storms. And that's not true. Think of Noah. He was building the ark and he had to go into the ark. Right? And it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Was he in the middle of God's will? Yes. But can you imagine what that was like, being in an ark where it was storming and raining and the water from the earth was bubbling up? And that could not have been a pleasant situation, but they were right in the middle of God's will. They ended up having to be on that thing 150 days. That does not sound good to me. But God had a purpose and a plan for them that was higher than whatever they could even think. I don't want to be in a boat for 40 days and 40 nights, tossing and turning. I don't know if you've ever been on a ship on a cruise in the middle of a storm. That is not a pleasant place. I cannot imagine what they went through. But no matter what it feels like, he is with you in the storm. That's what we need to remember. Sometimes the storm isn't about you. Just like in the case of Noah, the storm really wasn't about Noah. It was God was doing something in the earth. And he made a way for Noah. Noah may not have liked the idea of being in a boat for all those days, but you know what? It was the best thing afloat. It was the only thing afloat. And sometimes we don't like where we are, but we need to be thankful sometimes for the places that God has put us and recognize that sometimes it isn't about you. We just need to be at the center of who God is for us in the moment.
That's right. Which brings us to point 2, which the struggle in the storm usually causes us to feel stressed or anxious or upset or angry. A lot of times we start feeling a lot of emotions when that storm hits. Scared, afraid, not knowing what's going to happen in the future, not knowing what's going to be there for us. But we have to really, really understand that we're never beyond the scope of God's vision or his divine purpose. He has a reason. He has an assignment for us, and he's using that storm for you to go through so that you can fulfill the assignment God has for you. And sometimes we lose focus of that. We just look at the circumstances and what's going on, and we take our eyes off of God and what he's really trying to accomplish in our lives, and without realizing that he is preparing us for something. He's getting us ready for what he has. And all we can see is the strong winds and the waves and being tossed to and fro and our emotions going uphill and downhill and all around. But we have to sometimes just think that wait a minute, God, where are you? Okay, I know you haven't forgotten me. You're still here with me in the storm. We have to refocus and realize that he is there, that it's normal and natural to think, God, where are you? Because sometimes it appears like he's not there. Sometimes it looks like he's left us totally and completely out there to float on our own. And like we've said, sometimes, I'm sure Cynthia has probably said it, when a teacher gives a test, I'm a teacher, when a teacher gives a test, you don't tell the answers to the students. You're quiet. You're quiet during that test and let them take the test. And then you encourage them after the test. But during the test, when you're in the middle of the test, you don't get the answers. You don't necessarily know what the answer is going to be. You don't even know what the answer is sometimes. But God hasn't left you. He's still there. He's still monitoring the test, proctoring the tests. He's still there to lead, guide, and direct you. But we wonder why, and a lot of times we'll just redirect it to ourselves. Like Cynthia was talking about, it's not about us. It's about God and what he's trying to do. It could be about others. It may not have anything at all to do with us, what we're going through at the time. And we have to recognize that and realize that, okay, refocus. This is about God, what he's doing in my life. He's preparing me for something. Perhaps I won't know for a long time what he's preparing me for, but he is preparing me for something. And I will look back and go, oh, okay, aha. Now I see what this was all about. That's happened multiple times in my life where I didn't know what was going on at the time. And then I could look back and go, okay, this was about this or that. Sometimes it is about you and building your faith, building your trust in God, letting him. So like Cynthia said, he starts small and works bigger and bigger. It's kind of like a rubber band. He stretches you this far, and then the next time he'll stretch you this far and this far and this far. And eventually you've grown quite a bit with all the stretching that he's done in your life. And you're amazed that when you encounter a new problem, you'll go, oh, well, okay, this isn't that bad because I know God saw me through before. So I will persevere. I will get through this. God will see me through. And you have that anchor to hang on to. He is there in the midst of the storm. I think about in Luke, how Jesus said that they were going to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And so they're going, like he and the disciples are crossing across, and all of a sudden this humongous storm comes. I think of a hurricane type winds because they were pretty scared. The disciples were pretty scared in that boat. They were freaking out.
And they were fishermen, Patsy, so
Yeah.
it had to be pretty big.
Absolutely, because they were used to storms. So it must have been something where their boat was getting flooded. Something was going on that they are totally freaking out a bit about. And they're going, where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? Well, Jesus is in the boat and he's sleeping. He's sleeping because he knows the outcome. He knows what's going to happen. They didn't. They were focused on the circumstances. They were focused on the storm and the waves and everything that's going on around them, rather than looking at Jesus and seeing that he's resting and sleeping, so it must be okay. If he's going to sleep during this humongous storm, then everything must be going to turn out okay. And so what does he do? He gets up and calms the storm, goes to the front of the boat and says, peace, be still, and calms the storm, and everything settles back down. So sometimes we have to really understand that he already has the solution. He already has the answer to what you're going through. And sometimes it's just a matter of praying. Sometimes it's a matter of just worshiping, refocusing on the Lord. And so I know I went through a kind of a scary thing here recently with being diagnosed with rectal cancer. And so it was a very scary storm to face because my mother had passed away from colon cancer. And so looking at the circumstances of that storm, I could have totally and completely freaked out. But I knew that wasn't what God wanted me to do, because he's seen me through so many other storms that this was just another storm, although it seemed way bigger than a lot of the storms he's taken me through before. And so I thought, okay, what am I going to do in this storm? How am I going to react? What am I going to do? Because I knew people were watching also, what my reaction was going to be. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to do what I know to do, and that's to tap into God and his strength, his peace, because I know that his peace is the only peace that would settle my own spirit and settle my own heart, to know everything's going to be okay. No matter what, everything's going to be okay, because he's still in control. He's still in charge. He still knew what. It didn't surprise him, didn't take him by surprise. He didn't go, oh my goodness, look what's happening. He knew. And I knew that for me, the way I had to get through it was to start reading the word, was to start finding verses on healing, finding devotions on healing, to worship, to put worship music on, to worship through the storm. And so I know one of my favorite quotes that I've heard from, I'm not sure who it is, but it says, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass on. It's learning to dance in the rain. And I just love that quote, because it refocuses you on not the storm and not the fact that you're not going to, you are going to have storms, but learning how to deal with it, learning how to cope with it, learning what to do to regain that peace in your heart, getting your eyes off of the circumstance and onto the Lord, who is the healer, who is the great physician, who is the calmer of the storm. He is the one that can say, peace, be still. We can say, peace, be still to that storm.
Exactly. And, Patsy, we've shared a couple of points. I want to also share a third point. Our first point was that God's hand is in the storm, and that his plan is to settle our soul and not sink our ship, right? Our second point is that we're never beyond the scope of God's vision or his divine purpose for us. As long as we have our right relationship with God, we can count on him being in the boat with us, whether it doesn't look like it, or whether we can't see it or not, he's in the boat with us. And the third point that I'd like to share today is that sometimes we think that this is all I can take. I can't take any more. And then something else goes wrong. How many times have you heard someone say, I cannot handle anything else? And then something else happens. Well, you can handle as much as God says that you can handle, right? And so whether you choose to handle it or you choose not to handle it, sometimes it's just going to happen. And so when the darkness even gets darker, the storm, it's important to know the storm always ends.
That's right.
And Jesus always shows up, and his presence changes everything when he does. And, I thought about when I was thinking about these points and thinking about the storms in my life and the storms in the lives of the people, the clients that we minister to, Patsy. I thought about, I like to think about stories in the Bible and think about me being in that place. Can you imagine if we were the disciples or one of the disciples and we had followed Jesus and we thought, this is it. He's the Messiah. We're with him. I mean, he's here, and following him around and being part of his inner group. We were in his clique, Patsy, you and me. We was in Jesus's clique.
Right.
And you got it. He's feeding us. We get to hang with him. When everybody else has to go home, we can still hang with him. We're inside his group. And can you imagine what that would be like? And they saw so many miraculous things. I mean, just reaching out. I mean, even, the woman who just touched his garment, he didn't do anything and they were healed and people set free from demonic bondages. And him telling us all the time that we're with him and walking about, he's going to establish his kingdom. We're ready. Let's take it, and, Peter, chop off that ear. We're ready to go. That'd probably be me. I'd be the chopper of the ear off. And, and then all of a sudden he starts talking about dying. No. This does not work for me because this is not what you've been telling us about. You've been telling us that you're going to start a kingdom and this is the way it's supposed to go. And so we're with you. What do you mean you're going to die? And they didn't want to hear it. And then he died. Now, wait a minute. I just feel like I've been cheated. I've been betrayed. I followed this guy. I thought he was the Messiah and he's dead. How could he be God and be dead? I've been duped. I just wasted 3 years of my life. I'm duped. And then excuse this, ladies, but the stupid women, they went out there and he's gone and they got this really weird story. And it's just them silly women, right? Isn't that what they would think? I mean, let's think about it. And so they're in this room and they're freaked out. They're afraid of what's going on. They don't understand. And then all of a sudden Jesus appears. Oh my, can you imagine? He's there. And the scripture tells us that the doors were locked. How did he get in? You know what? I might have made a door going out without going through a door, freak out. Here the big deliverance minister would freak out if somebody appeared before me. Oh my, that's why they say when angels show up, they say, fear not. So Jesus shows up, right? So when the women had came and the tomb was empty, they had said it was risen. They had said that they had encountered Jesus and they come back and said that he is risen. But Jesus shows up in the room. So, sometimes when we're in the midst of a storm, these disciples felt that they were in the midst of the storm. Everything that they believed was done, they thought. It was over. They had wasted 3 years of their life and they were frightened and they were afraid and they didn't know where to go. And isn't that so much us so many times when something happens? I mean, I think and I kind of mentioned this already, but I wonder if they didn't think that they'd been betrayed, that he'd kind of, fed them a bunch of hooey. I mean, wouldn't you think that? If everything that you thought was going to happen, no longer is going to happen. Does that happen to us? Patsy, when a marriage of, 20 years dissolves, this is not what I thought was going to happen.
Right.
Is this what happens when we lose our home and we've been following after God? This is not what I thought was going to happen. Yeah. Is this when
a diagnosis of cancer? I didn't think that was going to happen because he's my doctor.
Right.
God's the great physician. He's the
you believe in healing. You're Holy Ghost filled. You believe in healing. God heals. Yeah. But you get this diagnosis. So what's going on? I mean, this was the reality of life. This happens to us all the time, so what if our spiritual oversight betrays us or hurts us or says something or does something? That's happened to both Patsy and I. What if we're misunderstood and who we are is not accepted in the place that we're at, and we're got the left foot of fellowship?
Mm-hmm.
That's hard to have betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe our spouse betrayed us. One of our children betrayed us. That's the storms of life. That's what those disciples were dealing with in that room. And then Jesus appeared. And I think the point that I want to say with that is that Jesus does show up. His presence changes everything. But sometimes our frame of mind has to be switched, because they could only see the situation in the earthly level where they were, because they hadn't switched their view to the godly level. They hadn't risen above the storm to see what God saw. They were seeing what they saw. When we rely on what we see, we only have the resources of what we have.
That's right.
When we can raise above the storm and get to the place of what God sees, then we have the resources of what God has.
That's right. And that's what happened with me and this diagnosis. I ended up having surgery, but it was all contained in one area. And so I could have gone through so much worry and fret and fear, and it wouldn't have changed anything. But I knew how I had to retain my peace. And that was the most important thing to me, is through all of this to maintain my peace and not to get freaked out and not to allow the storm to overtake me and push me down. Mm-hmm. And help and make me lose my faith or make me lose my relationship with the Lord. That's the one thing I think is so important, is you can either run to God or away from God. Mm-hmm. And I chose to run to God because I knew the truth of his word was still the truth. No matter what, no matter my circumstances, his truth is still the truth. His word is still the word. It's still life. And so just to let everybody know, I had a really good report and really good outcome.
And I'm rejoicing with you.
And so, but whatever that's preparing me for, whether it's to help other people through storms like this, or if it was just for my own testing, I don't know. But like I said, you don't always know at the time what you're being prepared for.
Yeah, those disciples in that room didn't know what was going on. They didn't know about, he had to leave, because now he's not one person, he's 12 people. Mm-hmm. And in 51 days, he's going to be 3,000, then another 5,000, because they're going to go out and preach the gospel, and they're going to do what he called us to do. We're going to wait and be filled with the Spirit. I truly believe we need to be filled with the Spirit. But then when we're filled with the Spirit, we need to step out and go.
That's right.
And so many of us, and I don't want to go there because that's another topic, about we get filled and then we sit. We're waiting for God to push us out. He already gave us what we need. We need to get out there and do it. So let's get back to what we're talking about today. So these disciples are in this room. Jesus shows up, mm-hmm. and their perspective totally changes. Okay, so you're talking about a kingdom that's mm-hmm. bigger than being the king of Israel.
Right.
Being the king of Jerusalem. This is a bigger king. This is bigger than what we thought. And everything that God does in our life, when he wants to call us, he calls us into ministry. When he sets us up, when he creates us before we're even born, he has a plan for our life. And it's so much bigger than we could ever ask or think or imagine or even dream that it would be. But when God shows up, when Jesus comes into the room, his presence changes everything. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tell you about kind of a unique experience. Patsy and I have been talking about doing this teaching or sharing on the storms of life. And Dean and I follow a lot of different ministries. We're really into watching what's happening in prophetically seasons and eras. And we follow a few ministries, and we were watching, actually, I think it was the Pentecost Conference with Chuck Pierce, and one of our favorite speakers, Kent Maddox, was there. And during the Pentecost, because of COVID, things have been done differently. And so Chuck Pierce in the Pentecost Conference, he was having different worship teams come in from different places all over the world. It's really beautiful to see all these different worship teams, and they had them all pre-taped, and they were playing them. And we were watching this one session, and I think it was Kent Maddox's session. I'm not certain. But a worship team came on, and this is like, all right, I love me some good worship, and I'm just really getting into this worship, and I'm sitting in my recliner, just worshiping the Lord and just enjoying the time. And during this time, it was good worship. And I was, I had my hands raised, and I could feel the temperature in the room change. It was like, oh, whoa, Holy Ghost is here. And they moved into a prophetic place in which they lost all consciousness as far as singing a particular song. They were no longer singing a song. And one woman particularly, she, all the musicians, it's just, I'll put a feed of it in my Facebook page, so that those of you who hear this and want to see it can look at it. But it's towards the end. It's an hour-long worship. They didn't show that all through the conference, but this hour-long worship that's now on YouTube, and the last 20 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, I don't know, I lose track of time, in which the woman begins to sing about songs of deliverance. It might even been Passover. I thought it was Pentecost, but how he covers us under his wings with songs of deliverance. And she begins to talk about in this song that started out as a song about how in the storms of life, we come under the wing of who God is. And we know that scripture, and it's such a beautiful song. Well, from there, she went into, she tapped into this prophetic vein, and she began to prophesy about how we are under his wing of his protection. But there are songs of deliverance there, but there's a higher place in which God is calling us up into. And I perked to kind of sit up in my chair when I heard it, and I thought, okay, this is really a word from God for this time. And as she began to sing about God, he's calling us higher, he's calling us higher, he's calling us higher, then she began to manifest in her body some of the things that God was calling. And you're watching this progress. And she starts to swirl with her hands, and she begins to talk about she was entering into the whirlwind of God. I'm entering into the whirlwind. I'm stepping into the whirlwind. I'm moving into the whirlwind. I'm moving into your whirlwind, God. And she begins to sing about all the different things that when we're in the whirlwind of God, we're under his protection, we're in his power, and just begins, it's very beautiful about being in the whirlwind. And then she goes on and she talks about making a choice, that he's calling us up higher, and that we can move into this whirlwind that can bring us up. Because a whirlwind can go up or down, but it brought her up into a place in which she was experiencing a storm, but it was a storm of God's presence. It was a storm of God's protection. It was a storm of his knowledge. It was a storm. Can you imagine if you're in a storm, in a whirlwind of God, what's going to come against you? Is a hurricane going to bother you if you're in the midst of a whirlwind of God's presence, of his place, of his preeminence, of where he is? And as this prophetic song goes on, it talks. She begins to prophesy that he's offering us this choice to step into this place of this whirlwind, and we have to turn and make this choice. And there's so many times when we are coming into a time of storm, we have a choice to enter the storm with God, or we have the choice of going through the storm without God. We're going to go through a storm. I'm telling you, you are going to go through a storm. You may be in the midst of a storm right now. And I'm telling you, there is a place that you can get where you can be in the midst of the storm, be in a storm, a whirlwind of God, in which all the things that surround you are still surrounding you. But there's a place where you can be in God, where you can see that storm from a higher place, and where it will take you into a place that you would not have gone before. Sometimes we need that storm to get us into the place that we would not have ever went on our own. And so we can look at storms as a blessing. We can see the storms in our life has produced so many great things. And I can say some of the toughest times in my life have produced the best fruit in my life. We need those storms. And I chose, when I went through all the major storms in my life, that I chose to go through them with God and be real with him. And I can say that maybe that's why I am so moved by that prophetic song about making the choice to enter the whirlwind, because there's going to be a storm coming. And I am just prophesying to you today that there are more storms coming. There are storms that we have no idea about. You know, who would have told us we would have had a pandemic that would have went across the world? Right. There are other storms that will be coming, and will you be in a place in which you can handle the storms because you're in a place where God can take you to where you'll know that what is happening, you're okay because you're in the midst of it with a God who cares for you and will care for you and will take care of you. So our points today were, the 3 points were that our first point was that God has his hand in the storm, and that his plan is to settle our soul, not sink our ship. And our second point was that we are never beyond his scope of vision or divine purpose. And our last point is Jesus always shows up, and his presence changes everything. When we make the choice to join him in the storm, we do have the choice. We have the choice to go it alone or choose to have him in the storm with us.
Right. That's right. Well, it looks like we're about out of time today. So I hope that you enjoyed and got some insight. Please let us know if there were any of those aha moments or something really spoke to your heart, so that we can address that maybe in future recordings or future live broadcasts. We want to be able to minister to those areas that you have need. And so that really helps us to get some feedback. So if you give us some feedback and let us know what it is that really is speaking to your heart. Our prayer for you is that you can break free from all of this, from that you can break out of this patterns, break out of fear, break out of the dread of the storm that you're either in or you see on the horizon. Sometimes we see them coming, we know, like hurricanes. Sometimes we just get caught up in the middle of them. So we just pray that this has helped encourage you in some way, that you can be an overcomer. We want to see you become an overcomer, and to be all that God's created you to be, and do all that God's created you to do. So until next time,
we'll see you next time on Lunch and Learn. God bless you.
Bye-bye.